Sharon Marie Tate entered the world on January 24, 1943, in Dallas, Texas, a place far removed from the glittering lights of Hollywood that would one day shine down on her. She was the eldest daughter of Doris and Paul Tate, and from the very beginning, there was something magnetic about her presence. Even as a child, neighbors and friends would remark that Sharon had a glow, a softness in her eyes that made people stop and notice. Yet, in those earliest years, nothing about her life suggested she would become one of Hollywood's most luminous faces, or that her name would forever be entangled with one of the darkest chapters in American history. Sharon grew up in a military household. Her father, a career Army officer, moved the family from base to base, state to state, even across the world. Constantly uprooted, Sharon never had the chance to stay long in one place, to build steady friendships or feel completely at home. But this nomadic life also gave her a strange aura. She always seemed both part of her surroundings and apart from them. Each new schoolyard, each new town, each unfamiliar street became a backdrop where Sharon learned to smile through change, to adapt, to charm. She became the girl people remembered, even after she was gone. As she blossomed into adolescence, her beauty became undeniable. Tall, graceful, with golden hair and soft features, she carried herself like someone unaware of the effect she had on those around her. Boys fell in love with her from a distance. Girls admired and envied her in equal measure. In high school, she was crowned homecoming queen, a moment captured in photographs that almost look like foreshadowing Sharon. Radiant, draped in a sash, the picture of American innocence. But behind the beauty, there was a restlessness, a quiet uncertainty about who she was supposed to be. She had dreams, yes, but they were vague, unshaped. Acting was not something she had chased with desperation. Fame was not something she plotted for. Instead, opportunities seemed to find her, as if fate itself was nudging her onto a stage she hadn't asked to stand on. When the Tate family was stationed in Italy during Sharon's teenage years, her striking looks began to attract attention. Strangers would stop her in the street. Photographers wanted to capture her face. And soon she found herself in front of cameras, modeling, appearing in small Italian films, her image frozen on glossy magazine pages. Yet Sharon remained hesitant, unsure if this was truly the path she wanted. She wasn't the aggressive dreamer Hollywood usually rewarded. She was shy, gentle, almost hesitant to claim the spotlight that kept following her. Still, when the family eventually returned to the United States, the momentum of her beauty and presence carried her forward. She began working in small roles, television appearances, walk-on parts in films. Slowly, the machinery of Hollywood took notice. Casting directors, producers, agents all whispered her name, noting not just her face, but the intangible quality she carried with her, the kind of magnetism that couldn't be taught. By the early 1960s, Sharon Tate was no longer just another pretty girl in California. She was becoming a name. She signed with major studios, appeared in the Beverly Hillbillies in recurring guest roles, and started building her reputation as more than a model. She was an actress with promise. Yet, Hollywood in those years was both seductive and cruel. Women were often viewed as ornaments, decorations to drape across sets, voices to deliver lines someone else had written. Sharon, despite her talent, was often judged solely on her appearance. She was told she was too beautiful, that her looks would overshadow her skill, that she could never be taken seriously. But Sharon longed for more. She wanted to be remembered, not just as a face, but as a woman who could carry a story, who could make an audience feel. That yearning would drive her choices, even as fate began quietly weaving its darker threads. By 1965, Sharon's career was gathering momentum. She landed a role in Eye of the Devil, a mysterious film shot in Europe, opposite David Niven and Deborah Kerr. It was during this time that Sharon met a man who would forever change her life. The young, ambitious Polish director Roman Polanski. Their meeting seemed almost like destiny. Two rising stars, drawn together by passion, creativity, and a shared hunger for artistry. Sharon fell deeply in love with him, and soon the two became inseparable. Their relationship was electric, a whirlwind of glamour, parties, creativity, and travel. Sharon was seen as Roman's muse, his shining jewel, the woman who embodied both innocence and allure. Hollywood adored them. Photographers chased them. Magazines splashed their faces across glossy covers. They became the symbol of a new kind of Hollywood couple. Modern, daring, cosmopolitan. Yet, beneath the shimmering surface, there were cracks. Roman Polanski was brilliant but difficult, magnetic but erratic. His world was filled with temptations, distractions, and rumors of infidelity. Sharon, sensitive and gentle, longed for stability, for a home filled with warmth and children. Their love was real, but their lives were moving at different speeds, and the tension between them was always there, quietly pulsing beneath the glitter. Still, Sharon tried to embrace the chaos, to be the partner Roman needed, to balance his restless genius with her grounded love. And for a while, it worked. She starred in Valley of the Dolls in 1967, a role that thrust her further into the public eye. The film was criticized, even mocked by some, but Sharon's performance was noted. Critics agreed she had a presence. She had something that made her unforgettable on screen. Audiences adored her. By the end of the 1960s, Sharon Tate had become a name Hollywood could no longer ignore. She was not just the wife of a rising director. She was not just a pretty face. She was Sharon Tate, luminous, talented, adored. And at 26 years old, she was expecting her first child. It seemed like everything she had longed for was finally within her grasp, but shadows were creeping closer. Hollywood, in those years, was not only a land of dreams. It was a city teetering between glamour and darkness. The late 1960s brought with them turbulence, cultural upheaval, political assassinations, protests, drugs flooding the streets, and a sense that the golden age of Hollywood innocence was slipping away. Beneath the shining lights of parties in Beverly Hills, there was paranoia. Whispers of cults, strange gatherings in the desert, men and women dressed in black, chanting under the stars. Sharon's life, radiant as it was moving toward a collision with something unspeakable. She had no way of knowing it, but forces had already begun circling her world. Dark figures whose names she did not yet know. And as the summer of 1969 approached, the perfect picture of Sharon Tate's life, the glamorous starlet, the devoted wife, the soon-to-be mother was about to be shattered forever. Because in Los Angeles, a man named Charles Manson was gathering followers. He promised them a new world, a family, a revolution. And soon, their twisted path would cross with Sharon's. The city was about to lose its innocence, and Sharon was standing at the center of the storm. The year was 1967, and Sharon Tate's life seemed like it was unfolding in the golden light of a California afternoon. She had just stepped further into the public eye with her performance in Valley of the Dolls. Though the critics were merciless toward the film itself, audiences were entranced by her presence. Sharon was luminous on screen, her beauty not just surface deep but radiant, as if she carried an inner glow the camera could barely contain. People whispered about her as the next great Hollywood star, though Sharon herself often seemed uncertain of that destiny. She longed for something quieter, something deeper, to be loved, to be safe, to have a home filled with laughter and children. And into this golden chapter of her life stepped Roman Polanski. Their romance had started during the filming of The Fearless Vampire Killers, a gothic, playful film that seemed far removed from Sharon's soft aura. Roman, the director, was magnetic, brilliant, unpredictable, sharp-tongued, with a restless energy that drew people in, even as it unnerved them. Sharon, gentle yet radiant, became his muse, his lover, and soon his wife. They were opposites that attracted like fire and water, and for a time, the world believed they were perfect together. Hollywood adored them. They were photographed at parties, Sharon's golden hair shining under camera flashes, Roman's piercing eyes locked on her. They were young, beautiful, successful, and the embodiment of the new Hollywood dream. Their Bel Air home became a gathering spot for actors, musicians, directors, artists. Nights were filled with music, dancing, laughter, and sometimes with darker indulgences, drugs passed hand to hand. Whispered conversations about a counterculture rising outside the gates of Beverly Hills. But for Sharon, there was always a fragility behind the glamour. She loved Roman deeply, but he was a man not easily contained. Rumors of infidelity swirled constantly around him, whispers of affairs and reckless nights with other women. Sharon, soft-hearted and sensitive, tried to ignore them, to believe in the bond they shared. She wanted to be the anchor in his storm, the calm presence he would always return to. Yet even her friends could see the cracks forming Sharon's longing for stability, Roman's hunger for freedom. By 1968, Sharon's career was blossoming further. She took roles that showcased her talent, not just her beauty. She spoke in interviews about wanting to be remembered as more than just a pretty face. Yet she often struggled against the image Hollywood had cast upon her, the angelic blonde, fragile and decorative. She wanted to be strong, layered, real. And in those quieter moments away from the cameras, she was. Then came the news that would light up her world. Sharon was pregnant. For her, this was the dream she had carried all along. A family, a child, a home that felt safe and whole. She spoke of her unborn baby with a joy that friends described as glowing, a happiness deeper than any red carpet triumph. Roman, though complicated and often distant, seemed proud too. For a brief moment, it appeared as if their lives were aligning, the turbulence softening into peace. Yet outside the walls of their Hollywood circle, Los Angeles was changing. The summer of love had given way to something darker. Protests filled the streets, drugs flooded the neighborhoods, and the once glittering city began to hum with paranoia. In the canyons and deserts, strange groups were forming communes, cults, families that spoke of revolution and the end of the world. One name, though not yet infamous, was whispered among some of the fringes: Charles Manson. He was a failed musician, a drifter with piercing eyes and a hypnotic voice. To some, he seemed like a prophet. To others, a parasite. He gathered around him young men and women, lost souls, seekers, outcasts, who called him their leader, their father, their messiah. They lived in decaying ranches, scrawling out their beliefs in cryptic messages, speaking of a coming war, a violent upheaval that would remake the world. Most of Hollywood dismissed Manson as another deranged eccentric haunting the outskirts of fame. But quietly, invisibly, his family was drawing closer to the city, closer to the people whose lives would one day be shattered. Sharon had no idea that these strange figures even existed. Her world was filled with baby clothes, nursery plans, late-night conversations with friends about motherhood. She was 8 months pregnant by the summer of 1969, her body glowing with life, her heart filled with anticipation. Friends described her as more beautiful than ever, her gentleness deepened by the child she carried. She spoke often of wanting Roman to slow down, to stay close, to prepare for the baby together. But Roman was often away, consumed by work, pulled by the currents of his own restless spirit. Still, Sharon surrounded herself with friends in their home on Cielo Drive, a house that would become infamous in days to come. The residence itself was steeped in Hollywood history, once occupied by stars, a place where laughter had filled the air for years. To Sharon, it was her sanctuary, the place where she would bring her baby into the world. The walls seemed to glow with warmth when she was there, filled with her soft voice, her gentle laughter, the music of friends strumming guitars by candlelight. But fate was moving pieces in the place with a quiet, chilling precision. Manson's followers began mingling with musicians, drifting into Hollywood circles, brushing against the very world Sharon lived in. Through music connections, parties, and whispered introductions, the distance between Sharon's golden life and Manson's dark vision grew smaller. It was as if two separate worlds were on a slow, inevitable collision course. And as the hot summer days of 1969 deepened, Sharon's glow, her joy, her sense of safety, stood in stark contrast to the darkness gathering just beyond her gates. Her friends noticed she seemed occasionally uneasy, as if sensing a shadow she couldn't quite name. She would smile it away, brush off her worries, reassure herself that she was safe in her home, surrounded by love. But late at night, when the city outside seemed too quiet, when the wind whispered through the canyon, perhaps she felt the storm edging closer. The Manson family was preparing for something. They spoke of death, of chaos, of a prophecy they believed would shake the world. And soon, Sharon Tate's name would be written into their story in blood. But in that summer, Sharon did not know. She still dreamed of a future, of a baby she would soon hold, of a life that finally felt whole. She was living in light, unaware of the darkness, walking steadily toward her door. And by the time the two worlds collided, there would be no escape. The year was 1969, and Hollywood was living through a strange season. On the surface, the city glimmered brighter than ever. Films were pushing boundaries. Music poured from every club along the Sunset Strip, and celebrities floated from one dazzling party to the next. But beneath the glow, something darker stirred. Los Angeles was restless, edgy, haunted by whispers of violence and change. The old Hollywood of polished glamour was crumbling, and in its place rose a new culture, wilder, unpredictable, tinged with shadows. For Sharon Tate, this year was meant to be one of joy. At 26 years old, she was radiant with pregnancy, her belly round with the child she and Roman Polanski had longed for. Friends who saw her in those months spoke of her glowing serenity, a happiness that seemed to spill into every room she entered. Sharon spoke often of the baby, the life she dreamed of creating, a family, a sanctuary of warmth and laughter. Her home at 10,050 Cielo Drive became her haven. Nestled in the Hollywood Hills, the house looked out over the glittering city below, its white walls and rustic beams filled with sunlight by day and the soft hum of conversation by night. Friends came often. Jay Sebring, the hairstylist and close confidant who remained devoted to Sharon even after their romance had ended. Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, intelligent and thoughtful, who had become a dear companion. Wojciech Frykowski, a Polish writer and friend of Roman's, who often lounged around the house as though he belonged there. Sharon liked to be surrounded by company. With Roman frequently away on work, the house felt safer, fuller, when friends were close. But while Sharon's circle filled her days with warmth, Los Angeles was also home to a different circle, one that gathered not in sunlit houses but in crumbling ranches on the city's outskirts. Charles Manson, a man in his mid-30s with wild eyes and an unnerving intensity, had gathered around him a group of young men and women. They were mostly runaways, drifters, people searching for meaning in the chaos of the 60s. To them, Manson was not just a leader, he was a prophet. He preached of love and freedom, of a coming apocalypse, of a war between races that he claimed would tear the world apart. He called it Helter Skelter, twisting the title of a Beatles song into a prophecy of violence. The Manson family, as they called themselves, lived at Spahn Ranch, a dusty, decaying film set once used for cowboy movies. They scavenged, stole, and survived on the edges of society, their minds clouded by drugs and Manson's hypnotic grip. He convinced them they were chosen, that they would help ignite the coming chaos, that death itself was just another doorway. And slowly, disturbingly, his fantasies began to sharpen into plans. Unbeknownst to Sharon, the worlds of Hollywood and the family were brushing against one another. Through music connections, Manson had briefly courted fame himself, hoping to break into the industry. He mingled with musicians, charmed producers, even recorded songs. For a time, he hovered on the fringes of Hollywood's elite, close enough to taste the life he wanted, but would never have. And when the music world rejected him, his bitterness grew. In his twisted mind, Hollywood became part of the enemy, a glittering world he would punish. Meanwhile, Sharon prepared for her baby. She decorated the nursery, spoke excitedly with friends, and daydreamed of holding her child in her arms. She was lonely without Roman, who was working in Europe, but she surrounded herself with friends, filling the Cielo Drive house with warmth. Visitors remembered her as tender, gracious, always offering comfort. Even heavily pregnant, she glowed. Yet there were moments, small and fleeting, when unease seemed to shadow her. A sound outside at night, a knock at the door that lingered too long, the sense of being watched. Perhaps it was only the nerves of a young mother-to-be. Or perhaps it was the storm creeping closer in the canyons of Los Angeles. Manson's followers were slipping further into darkness. They broke into homes, stole cars, carried knives. Manson told them they had to kill, to shed blood, to spark the war he promised. And his disciples, lost and loyal, believed him. One by one, they surrendered their souls to his vision, until violence became inevitable. Sharon, of course, knew none of this. To her, the world was still beautiful, filled with hope. She walked barefoot through the halls of her home, her hands resting on her belly, whispering to her unborn child. She spoke of the future, of laughter and sunlight, of love that would last forever. Friends remembered how she would lean back in a chair, tired but happy, her eyes sparkling when she spoke of becoming a mother. But the city outside was changing. Strangers drifted through the hills. Hitchhikers haunted the roads. Stories of break-ins and violence circulated. Some of Sharon's friends felt it too. The tension in the air, the sense that something was not right. But they, like her, brushed it aside. After all, this was Hollywood. Life here has always been strange, unpredictable, even dangerous. They believed they were safe, and yet, in the final days of July and the early days of August 1969, the distance between Sharon's sanctuary and Manson's madness collapsed. His followers were restless, their eyes glazed with visions of blood. They whispered of targets, of Hollywood stars, of homes filled with riches and beauty. They drove through the canyons at night, scouting houses, memorizing gates and driveways. Sharon, 8.5 months pregnant, rested in her home, unaware that strangers were circling in the dark. She spoke to her mother on the phone, laughed with her friends, flipped through magazines filled with baby clothes and toys. The nursery was ready. The crib waited. Her whole life was about to begin, but fate was closing in. The summer nights grew heavy, the air thick with heat. The hills seemed quieter than usual, the silence almost watchful. And then in the final nights before it happened, there were signs. A car slowing near the house. Footsteps on the gravel outside. Dogs barking in the distance. Things most people would ignore, but things that, in hindsight, were warnings. On the night of August 8, 1969, Sharon Tate and her friends gathered at the Cielo Drive house. The evening was soft, filled with conversation and laughter. Sharon, tired but glowing, lowered herself carefully into a chair, smiling at her friends as they poured wine, strummed music, talked of films and books. No one imagined that just beyond the canyon roads, darkness was stirring, because Manson's family had been given an order. They had chosen their night. They had chosen their victims, and their path was already leading them straight to Cielo Drive. The house, filled with warmth and light, stood waiting, unaware that before dawn, it would become the stage for one of the most infamous nights in Hollywood history. The night of August 8, 1969, was deceptively ordinary. In the hills of Los Angeles, the sky glowed with a faint orange haze, the air heavy with late summer warmth. At 10050 Cielo Drive, Sharon Tate's home stood like a beacon, its windows glowing with soft golden light, laughter spilling faintly into the night. Inside, Sharon reclined carefully in a cushioned chair, one hand resting on her swollen belly, her body tired but her spirit tender and alive. Around her, her friends moved easily through the room's shimmering, always attentive, always ready to fetch a pillow or offer a smile. Abigail Folger, intelligent and gentle, whose soft voice carried as she discussed books with Wojciech Frykowski, who lounged nearby, restless and quick with opinions. It was a night of companionship, simple and fragile, as though the house itself was wrapping them in its arms, keeping the world at bay. But outside, on the dark canyon roads, another car was winding its way upward. A 1959 Ford, its headlights cutting through the shadows, its passengers grim with purpose. Inside sat four of Charles Manson's disciples. Charles Tex Watson at the wheel, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. They were young, barely out of their teens in some cases, but their eyes burned with a feverish devotion. They had been given orders, and orders from Manson were not to be questioned. He had told them to strike terror into Hollywood, to send a message written in blood. And so they drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound against the stillness of the canyon night. Linda Kasabian, the newest member, felt unease crawling through her veins. She had not imagined it would come to this. But the others, hardened by weeks of Manson's twisted sermons, felt no hesitation. Tex Watson, tall and commanding, carried a knife and revolver. Susan Atkins hummed to herself, as though the task ahead was not murder but ritual. Patricia Krenwinkel clutched her knife, her thoughts drowned in Manson's words about helter-skelter, about the war they would ignite. They were not driving toward strangers in their minds. They were driving toward destiny. As the car pulled near Cielo Drive, the road narrowed into silence. The gate stood ahead, familiar to Manson himself, who had once visited this very house when record producer Terry Melcher had lived there. But Melcher had moved on, and Sharon Tate now called it home. Fate or coincidence had placed her directly in Manson's path. Tex cut the headlights. The night swallowed the car whole. They parked near the entrance, shadows slipping from the vehicle like predators. The air smelled of sagebrush and dust. The house glowed faintly in the distance, unaware. The first sign of danger came not from the house, but from the road itself. A car approached a young man, Stephen Parent, driving down after visiting the caretaker who lived in the guest house nearby. Parents were not part of Sharon's circle, not part of Hollywood's world. He was simply in the wrong place at the worst time. Tex Watson stopped him. Words were exchanged. Then a gunshot shattered the silence. Parent slumped lifeless, his dreams extinguished in an instant. The night had begun. The killers cut the phone lines and crept toward the house. Inside, Sharon and her friends were still unaware, the air filled with quiet laughter, the calm of late evening. The first intrusion was sudden, brutal. Tex Watson burst through, his gun raised, his voice commanding. Behind him came Susan and Patricia, faces twisted in fervor. Linda lingered outside, paralyzed, her heart pounding. What unfolded inside the house in those next minutes was chaos, terror, and unrelenting cruelty. Shimmering, protective as ever, tried to shield Sharon, pleading for her safety. He was silenced with violence. his body collapsing, his life ripped away. Abigail Folger fought, her delicate frame running through the night, but Patricia chased her relentlessly until the heiress fell under the weight of merciless blades. Wojciech struggled fiercely, a desperate will to survive, but Tex's brutality overcame him. And Sharon, 8.5 months pregnant, her hands trembling over the life inside her, was left surrounded by death. Witnesses later recalled how Susan Atkins stood over her, knife in hand, and Sharon begged not for herself but for her child. Her words echoed through the night, desperate, pleading, filled with a mother's love. "Please, let me have my baby." The mercy was not in them. Tex and Susan delivered their horror, and Sharon Tate's light was extinguished, her body collapsing in the home that had once been her sanctuary. She was 26 years old. The killer scrawled words on the walls in blood, symbols of madness, before vanishing into the canyon night. The house fell silent, its golden glow replaced by the cold stillness of death. The wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and blood. The next morning, the world would awaken to the unthinkable. When the bodies were discovered, Los Angeles shook. Newspapers screamed of the horror. Photographs of Sharon's beauty printed alongside words of murder and chaos. Hollywood recoiled, its stars suddenly aware that even their sanctuaries could be invaded, their lives snuffed out. Rumors swirled about drug deals, cults, conspiracies. The truth was stranger, darker, harder to grasp. Roman Polanski, in London at the time, received the news with devastation that could scarcely be spoken. His wife, his unborn child, gone in an act of senseless violence. Friends wept, the city trembled, and Sharon's name was forever etched into history, not as the rising star she had been, but as the tragic victim of a night of madness. The investigation was chaotic at first, theories swirling wildly. But slowly, the pieces began to connect. The strange cult at Spawn Ranch, the whispers of Manson, the confessions of frightened followers. One by one, the family was captured, their faces appearing in courtrooms, their laughter chilling as they spoke of death without remorse. Charles Manson himself, small in stature but commanding in presence, sat with an eerie calm, his eyes glinting with something between madness and triumph. His followers sang in the hallways, carved X's into their foreheads, declared their loyalty even as the world recoiled in horror. The trial of the century unfolded. Details of the murders spilled into public record, each revelation more grotesque than the last. And yet, at the heart of it all, Sharon's name remained. She was no longer merely the victim of a crime. She had become a symbol of innocence lost, of beauty destroyed, of Hollywood's darkest night. Charles Manson and several of his followers were sentenced to death, later commuted to life in prison. They would live behind bars, their names infamous, their souls forever marked by blood. But Sharon Tate and her unborn child could never return. In the years that followed, Sharon's family carried her memory like a torch. Her mother, Doris Tate, transformed her grief into activism, becoming a powerful voice for victims' rights. Her sisters carried Sharon's story into the world, ensuring she was remembered not only for the way she died, but for the way she lived. Gentle, kind, dreaming of a family, loving without hesitation. The house at Cielo Drive stood for years, its walls haunted, until it was eventually torn down. But even with its absence, the shadows lingered. To this day, the name Sharon Tate carries with it a chill, a sorrow, a reminder of how fragile life can be, how beauty can be cut down by madness. Yet Sharon's legacy endures beyond tragedy. Her films remain, her smile captured in photographs, her laughter remembered by friends. She is not only the victim of August 9, 1969. She is the girl who dreamed of a family, who spoke softly to her unborn child, who glowed with love until her final breath. Hollywood would never be the same after that night. But in the mystery, in the sorrow, in the unending retelling of Sharon Tate's story, one thing remains clear. She was more than her death. She was light. She was hopeful. And though her life was stolen, her spirit refuses to be forgotten. And so, every time her name is spoken, every time her story is told, the tragedy is heavy, but the beauty lingers too. Sharon Tate, forever 26, forever radiant, forever loved. The story of Sharon Tate did not end on the night of August 9th, 1969. Though her life was stolen, though her dreams were cut short, the ripples of her presence stretched far beyond that evening. For those who loved her, for Hollywood, for the world that read her name in headlines, Sharon became something more than an actress, more than a victim. She became a symbol, a ghostly reminder of innocence lost and beauty forever frozen in time. In the aftermath of the murders, grief consumed Sharon's family. Roman Polanski, shattered, withdrew from the world, haunted by images of his wife and unborn child. He carried guilt like an unshakable shadow, often wondering if he could have changed the outcome had he been there. For Doris Tate, Sharon's mother, the grief was an open wound. But from that wound came a fire. Doris refused to let her daughter be remembered only for her death. She became a voice for the voiceless, one of the first people in California to advocate for victims' rights. She spoke in courtrooms, faced Manson's followers, and demanded that the justice system never forget Sharon and the others. Her fight changed the law. Victim impact statements became part of trials because Doris Tate stood up, her trembling hands holding photographs of her daughter, her voice breaking but never silenced. Through her, Sharon's memory became a force for change. Years passed. The killers sat behind bars, aging, their faces lined, their names still whispered with disgust. Each time parole was offered, Sharon's family fought to keep them imprisoned, reminding the world of the horror they had unleashed. Sharon's sisters carried that torch after Doris passed, each hearing, each statement, another way of saying, Sharon's voice will never be silenced. But Sharon's story was not only one of tragedy. Her films, though few, began to take on a new light. In Valley of the Dolls, her gentle, vulnerable presence drew audiences back. In The Fearless Vampire Killers, her playfulness shone. Viewers saw not just an actress, but a young woman on the cusp of greatness, her potential shimmering like an unfinished melody. With every viewing, she seemed alive again, laughing, breathing, radiant. Yet there was something else beyond the films, beyond the photographs, beyond the history books. Something spectral. The house at 10,050 Cielo Drive, long after the murders, carried a reputation darker than its walls could contain. Visitors spoke of cold drafts, of whispers in empty rooms, of strange lights flickering at night. Some claimed to see a woman, dressed in white, drifting through hallways, her form translucent, her presence sorrowful. Others spoke of an energy neither malicious nor peaceful, simply a lingering echo, as though the house itself had absorbed the terror of that night. In the years before the house was demolished, musicians and actors who lived there described unease. Even Trent Reznor of 9 Inch Nails, who once recorded music in the home, admitted that the atmosphere was suffocating, heavy with something unseen. He later confessed he felt ashamed of his fascination with the house after speaking to Sharon's sister. The walls had become a shrine to pain, and when the house was torn down, it was as if Los Angeles tried to bury its own nightmare. But even in rubble, the haunting persisted. Stories began to circulate of Sharon's ghost appearing elsewhere in dreams, in flickers of mirrors, in the quiet corners of Hollywood where memory refuses to fade. Some believe she lingers not because of her death, but because of her love, tethered forever to the child she never met, to the life she never lived. True crime culture, which would explode in decades to come, often found itself circling back to Sharon's story. Documentaries, books, endless retellings, all drawn to the horror, yes, but also to the fragility of Sharon's fate. She became the face of innocence destroyed, a cautionary tale of beauty meeting brutality. And yet, through every retelling, there was always a thread of reverence, a recognition that Sharon was more than her end. Her family continued to remind the world of who she was. Friends spoke of her kindness, her laughter, her endless generosity. Roman Polanski, even in his fractured life, often spoke of Sharon as his great love, the light that was stolen from him. Sharon's name appeared in songs, in films, in whispered stories told by those who felt the mystery of her spirit dot. And then came the culture of remembrance, vigils, online communities. Fans who never met her left flowers on her grave, as though they knew her, as though her warmth had somehow reached across decades and touched them. For some, Sharon symbolized the end of the 1960s dream, that moment when peace and love gave way to fear and shadows. For others, she was a symbol of eternal youth, forever glowing, forever gentle dot as time marched on. Charles Manson died in prison, his voice finally silenced. His followers grew old, their devotion withering under the weight of decades. But Sharon never aged. Sharon remained 26, her image untouched by time, her beauty undimmed. In a strange way, she triumphed over her killers, because while they rotted behind bars, her memory remained radiant. The haunting mysteries surrounding Sharon linger even today. Some ask, was it coincidence that Manson chose that house, or was it fate? Was Sharon simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, or was she the vessel for a message darker than we can understand? Others wonder about the unborn child she carried. Had he lived, what life would he have led? Would Roman Polanski's world have been reshaped entirely? Questions without answers, hanging in the air like smoke. And always, there are the ghost stories. Visitors to her resting place swear they feel warmth, a presence, a gentle brush of air that feels like love. In Hollywood, some actors have confessed to seeing Sharon in dreams before playing roles about her, as though she hovers still, guiding, watching, ensuring that her memory is treated with care. 50 years later, her story still captivates. Films like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood resurrect her presence, giving her back a smile, a laugh, a chance to walk the streets again. Viewers wept, not because they were reminded of her death, but because they were allowed, for a moment, to imagine her life continuing dancing, laughing, and radiant under the sun. This is Sharon's true legacy. Not only the tragedy that befell her, not only the horror etched into history, but the way her spirit continues to move people. The way she forces us to look at beauty and innocence and realize how fragile they are. The way she reminds us that behind every headline, every tragedy, there is a human being who loved, who dreamed, who deserved so much more dot, and perhaps that is why her presence lingers. Perhaps Sharon Tate is not a ghost of sorrow, but a ghost of love, her essence refusing to be erased, her story refusing to be reduced to blood and darkness. When the world remembers her, it remembers not only the cruelty of her fate, but the softness of her smile, the warmth of her heart, the glow of her youth. Sharon Tate will never be forgotten. Her legacy is written in film, in law, in whispers of the supernatural, in the hearts of strangers who feel they knew her. She is a mystery, not because of the night that claimed her, but because of the light that still radiates from her story. And so, as the credits of her life roll in our minds, we are left not with the image of her final moments, but with something more powerful. Sharon, walking barefoot across a sunlit floor, her laughter carrying through the air, her hand resting gently on her unborn child. Sharon, radiant, eternal, haunting not with fear, but with love. She was, and will always be, more than a tragedy. She was a star. She remains a mystery. And in that mystery, she lives forever.